August 9th, 1943, 14,000 feet above the Ploesti oil refineries, Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson felt his P-38 Lightning shudder as flak burst 300 yards to port. Black smoke bloomed across the morning sky like poisonous flowers. Below him the refineries burned. B-24 Liberators had just completed their low-level bombing runs, and now they were scattered, damaged, fleeing north toward friendly territory. Johnson's squadron, the 56th Fighter Group's Lightning detachment, had one mission: get the bombers home. Then his wingman's voice cracked through the radio. Bandits, 2 o'clock high, Messerschmitt 109's at least a dozen, diving from 18,000 feet. Johnson's head snapped right. What he saw made his throat tighten. Not 12 BF-109's, 20, maybe more, pouring down from altitude in a coordinated assault formation, their Daimler-Benz engines howling as they accelerated toward the vulnerable bombers. The German fighters had every advantage: altitude, speed, position, and they were diving on crippled bombers that couldn't maneuver, couldn't defend themselves, couldn't survive without immediate intervention. Standard doctrine was clear. P-38 pilots were to maintain altitude advantage, engage with diving attacks, and avoid prolonged turning fights with the more agile Messerschmitts. The Lightning's strengths were speed, firepower, and energy retention. Never compromise altitude, never accept a disadvantageous engagement geometry, never, under any circumstances, perform a split S maneuver above enemy territory. The split S was forbidden for good reasons. Rolling inverted and pulling through a vertical dive traded all your altitude for speed and reversed your direction. In the thin air combat zone above 10,000 feet, the maneuver consumed 3,000 to 4,000 feet of altitude. If you started too low, you'd hit the ground. If you started above enemy fighters, you'd dive into their guns. If your engine failed mid-maneuver, you were dead. And if you misjudged your pull-out, compressibility would lock your controls and turn your aircraft into a tomb. But Johnson wasn't thinking about doctrine. He was thinking about 16 B-24 crews already shot to pieces, limping north with dead engines and wounded men aboard. 20 BF-109's were about to massacre them. He rolled his P-38, inverted, and pulled. What happened in the next 4 minutes would force Luftwaffe tactical analysts to rewrite every assessment they'd made about the American twin-engine fighters' combat capabilities. Because doctrine doesn't account for pilots who decide that saving lives matters more than following rules. And sometimes the most effective tactic is the one the enemy knows you'd never dare to use. By August 1943, the air war over occupied Europe had evolved into a brutal calculus of attrition. American daylight bombing doctrine demanded that heavy bombers strike deep into German-controlled territory without fighter escort beyond the range limits of existing fighters. The result was predictable and horrific. Bomber losses exceeded 10% on some missions. Entire squadrons were annihilated. Crews who survived one tour were rare. Crews who survived two were rarer still. The Ploesti raid represented the strategic bombing campaign's desperate gamble. Romania's oil refineries supplied roughly 30% of Germany's fuel. Destroy Ploesti, and you crippled the Wehrmacht's ability to sustain its operations on the Eastern Front. The plan called for B-24 Liberators flying from North Africa to execute a low-level attack, skimming rooftops at 200 feet, bombing with delayed fuses, and escaping before German defenses could coordinate a response. The execution was catastrophic. Navigation errors scattered the formations, delayed fuses detonated while bombers flew over targets. Flak concentrations exceeded intelligence estimates by 300%. German fighters from Romanian bases scrambled in force. Of the 178 B-24's that launched, 54 were destroyed. Hundreds of crewmen died. The survivors limped north, trailing smoke, engines failed, hydraulics leaking, some missing entire sections of fuselage. The P-38 Lightning squadrons assigned to provide withdrawal support launched from southern Italy. Their orders were to rendezvous with returning bombers over the Danube and escort them to safety. What they found instead was chaos. Bombers scattered across 50 miles of hostile airspace, German fighters harassing crippled aircraft, and clear skies. that gave Luftwaffe controllers perfect visibility to coordinate concentrated attacks. Johnson's squadron commander, Major Harold Holt, had briefed the mission that morning with unusual gravity. Most of these bombers won't make it without us. Stay with them, engage any threats, but don't get drawn into individual dogfights. Our job is protection, not glory. The briefing included specific warnings about Bf-109 tactics. German pilots knew the P-38's weaknesses. The Lightning couldn't turn with a 109 in sustained horizontal maneuvering. Its large profile made it vulnerable to deflection shooting, and its twin-boom design meant that battle damage often resulted in asymmetric thrust that made the aircraft nearly uncontrollable. German tactical bulletins captured earlier in the war had detailed their assessment of the P-38. The American twin-engine fighter possesses excellent speed and firepower, but lacks maneuverability. Engage in turning combat, force vertical maneuvering, where altitude loss compromises their tactical position. Avoid head-on attacks, where concentrated nose armament provides advantage. They weren't wrong. In combat over Tunisia and Sicily, P-38 pilots had learned hard lessons about the Lightning's limitations. Several had died attempting to dogfight Messerschmitts and Macchi fighters that could outturn them at medium speeds. Squadron doctrine emphasized using the P-38's speed to control engagement geometry, slash attacks, high-speed passes, never slow down, never get trapped in a turning fight. The split S maneuver violated every principle. Rolling inverted meant momentarily losing sight of the enemy. Pulling through the dive meant loading the airframe with G-forces that could overstress already battle-damaged structures. And the altitude loss, 3,000 to 4,000 feet, meant surrendering the one advantage the P-38 needed to survive: energy, speed, height. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Technical Order TO-102 Bravo explicitly prohibited the split S in combat zones. The maneuver is prohibited above hostile territory due to altitude loss and vulnerability during execution. Pilots performing unauthorized split S maneuvers will face disciplinary action. The order had been issued after Lieutenant Marcus Webb had performed a split S during a training flight over North Africa, blacked out during the pullout, and crashed. The wreckage showed he'd pulled over 9 Gs. His spine had compressed. His ribs had fractured. He'd died on impact, but the autopsy suggested he'd been unconscious before he hit the ground. After Webb's death, squadron commanders emphasized the prohibition repeatedly. The split S kills pilots. Don't use it. Every fighter pilot knew the maneuver. It was taught during basic flight training as an emergency escape tactic. But combat employment was forbidden. The risks outweighed any tactical benefit. What made the prohibition particularly galling was that German pilots used the split S constantly. Bf-109 pilots would engage, fire, and then roll, inverted, and dive away before American fighters could respond. The Messerschmitt's lighter weight and smaller profile meant it could execute the maneuver with less altitude loss. German pilots knew American fighters wouldn't follow. It became standard escape doctrine. Johnson had watched German fighters use the tactic a dozen times. He'd cursed every time. The 109 would be right there, lined up, vulnerable, and then it would flip and dive and vanish. By the time Johnson could reverse his direction through a less aggressive maneuver, the German was gone, escaped, free to climb back to altitude and attack again. But Johnson had also thought about the maneuver extensively. He'd studied its geometry. He'd calculated altitude loss under different entry speeds. He'd practiced it alone, over water, where failure meant ditching instead of dying. He knew the P-38 could survive the maneuver if executed correctly. The technical order wasn't based on aerodynamic impossibility. It was based on risk management. Too many pilots had died, so the maneuver was forbidden. On August 9th, over Ploesti, Robert Johnson decided that 16 B-24 crews facing certain death constituted circumstances where risk management took second place to necessity. The Bf-109s dove toward the bombers in a coordinated wave. German fighter tactics had evolved significantly by mid-1943. Early war engagements had featured individual heroics, ace pilots seeking glory through one-on-one duels. By 43, the Luftwaffe fought with disciplined formations, mutual support, and coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm defensive positions. The formation diving on the Ploesti survivors included aircraft from Jagdgeschwader 52, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced units. These weren't novice pilots. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, where they'd perfected tactics for attacking Soviet bombers. Their approach was methodical. The lead element, 4 aircraft, would attack from above and behind, drawing defensive fire. The second element, 6 aircraft, would swing wide and attack from the beam, exploiting blind spots in the bomber's defensive coverage. The third element, another 6 aircraft, would follow up, targeting already damaged aircraft. The remaining 4 Bf-109s held high cover, positioned to engage any Allied fighters attempting to interfere. It was doctrine. It was practiced. It was devastatingly effective. Johnson's squadron numbered 8 P-38's, half the German force, outnumbered but not outmatched if they used their advantages correctly. Speed, firepower, altitude, except Johnson didn't have altitude anymore. He'd rolled inverted, pulled through, and was now diving vertically at 410 miles per hour, accelerating toward the German formation from an impossible angle, behind and below. The split S had cost him 3,800 feet. He'd started at 14,000 feet. Now he was at 10,200 feet, screaming downward through air thick with flak fragments and smoke, his twin Allison engines roaring at war emergency power, his control column pulled back hard as he transitioned from vertical dive to level flight. The G-forces crushed him into his seat. His vision narrowed. Grey edges crept in from the periphery. He'd pulled 7 Gs, maybe 8. His G-suit inflated, squeezing his legs, forcing blood back toward his brain. He gasped, grunted, fought to stay conscious. The horizon appeared. He was level 10,000 feet, airspeed 440 miles per hour, and he was directly behind the trailing element of Bf-109s. They hadn't seen him. German doctrine said American fighters wouldn't split S, so they weren't looking behind and below. They were focused forward, lining up attack runs on the bombers ahead. Johnson selected the rightmost Bf-109, range 800 yards, closing. His gunsight pipper centered on the Messerschmitt's fuselage, 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns and 1 20mm Hispano cannon, all mounted in the P-38's nose, all perfectly aligned. He pressed the trigger at 600 yards. The lightning shuddered as concentrated firepower erupted forward. Tracers streamed. Toward the target, the Bf-109's right wing disintegrated. Pieces spun away, fabric and aluminum tumbling through the air. The German fighter snap-rolled left and went down. No parachute. The pilot never knew what hit him. Johnson's wingman, Second Lieutenant Thomas Crawford, had followed him through the split S. Crawford had hesitated, watching his flight leader perform the forbidden maneuver, then made his own decision. He rolled, inverted, and pulled through 2 seconds behind Johnson. Crawford emerged from his dive at 10,500 feet, slightly higher than Johnson, but perfectly positioned behind a second Bf-109. He fired from 500 yards. The Messerschmitt's cockpit exploded. Canopy fragments glittered in the sunlight. The aircraft nosed down and fell away. 2 German fighters destroyed in 6 seconds. The rest of the formation finally realized they were under attack from an impossible direction. Chaos erupted. Bf-109s broke in every direction, abandoning their coordinated assault, scattering to evade the threat that had appeared from below. Their tactical cohesion, their practiced formations, their mutual support, all of it disintegrated as survival instinct overrode training. Johnson climbed hard, trading his excess speed for altitude. His airspeed bled from 440 miles per hour to 320. His altitude increased from 10,000 feet to 12,000 feet. He spotted 3 Bf-109s, reforming ahead, trying to re-establish attack geometry against the bombers. He rolled right, pulled lead, fired. The burst caught the trailing 109 across the engine cowling. Smoke poured out. The aircraft descended in a glide, streaming coolant, its Daimler-Benz engine seized. 3 destroyed. Elapsed time, 40 seconds. Crawford had climbed on Johnson's right wing. The two P-38's moved like a single organism, mutual support, overlapping fields of fire. They'd flown together for 7 months. They knew each other's tendencies, anticipated each other's maneuvers. A Bf-109 dove on Crawford from above, tracers flickering past Crawford's canopy. Johnson rolled inverted, pulled through another split S, smaller this time. Controlled. Calculated. He dove 2,000 feet, reversed, and came up behind the attacking Messerschmitt. He fired from 400 yards. The 109's tail section separated. The aircraft tumbled, completely uncontrollable. The pilot bailed out at 8,000 feet, 4 destroyed. The remaining Bf-109's had abandoned their attack on the bombers entirely. They were defensive now, trying to escape, trying to survive. Johnson's squadron commander Major Holt had arrived with the other 6 P-38's. They engaged from above, using conventional tactics, slashing attacks from altitude. But Johnson and Crawford had broken the German formation's cohesion. What should have been a coordinated attack had become a scattered melee. Individual German pilots fought for survival, separated from mutual support, unable to reform, unable to execute doctrine. Johnson spotted 2 Bf-19's flying in close formation, heading south, trying to disengage. He dove after them, Crawford on his wing. The P-38's speed advantage was overwhelming. He closed to 500 yards. The German pilots saw him, broke apart, split left and right. Johnson followed the left-hand aircraft. The Messerschmitt tried a hard turn. At 300 miles per hour, it could turn tighter than the heavier P-38, but Johnson didn't turn with him. He climbed, rolled inverted, and performed another splits, coming down behind the German's turn. The Bf-109 pilot never had time to react. Johnson fired from 300 yards. The Messerschmitt exploded, fuel tanks igniting, a fireball that consumed the aircraft in an instant. 5 destroyed. Crawford had pursued the other 109. The German dove toward the deck, trying to escape at low altitude where the P-38's size would make it vulnerable to ground fire. Crawford followed to 5,000 feet, fired, and saw strikes across the 109's fuselage. The Messerschmitt hit the ground at 350 miles per hour, 6 destroyed between them. Johnson 3, Crawford 3, the remaining Bf-109's disengaged entirely, diving away to the southeast, abandoning the bombers, conceding the airspace. Johnson's squadron had successfully protected the withdrawal. The B-24's continued north, smoking, damaged, but alive. 16 crews that should have died made it home. Johnson and Crawford landed at Foggia 3 hours later. Their crew chiefs counted ammunition expenditure. Johnson had fired 960 rounds total. Crawford had fired 820. Combined, they'd destroyed 6 German fighters, damaged 2 others confirmed by other pilots' observations, and scattered a formation that should have annihilated the bomber stream. But the most significant statistic wasn't the kills. It was the maneuver. Johnson had performed the split S 4 times during the engagement. Crawford had performed it twice. Neither pilot had lost control. Neither aircraft had suffered structural failure. The forbidden maneuver had worked exactly as Johnson had calculated it would. Major Holt summoned both pilots immediately after landing. Johnson expected disciplinary action. He had violated explicit orders. He'd performed a prohibited maneuver multiple times. He'd endangered his aircraft and his wingman. Instead, Holt asked a single question. Can you teach that to the rest of the squadron? Intelligence officers arrived from 15th Air Force headquarters within 24 hours. They interviewed Johnson extensively. They wanted details: entry speed, dive angle, G-load during pullout, altitude loss, control inputs, everything. Johnson's report was precise. The split S is survivable in the P-38 if executed within specific parameters. Entry speed should not exceed 420 miles per hour indicated. Dive angle should be vertical or near vertical. G-load during pullout will approach 8 Gs. Altitude loss will range from 3,500 to 4,200 feet, depending on entry altitude and air density. Control authority remains adequate throughout the maneuver if entry conditions are correct. Test pilots at Wright Field in Ohio received the report on August 13th. They began systematic trials with P-38J models. Their findings confirmed Johnson's observations. The Lightning could survive repeated split-S maneuvers without structural failure. The technical prohibition had been based on conservative engineering assumptions and insufficient combat data. But the tactical implications were more significant than the engineering validation. Johnson had demonstrated that the split-S could be used offensively, not just as an emergency escape maneuver. By attacking from below after a split-S reversal, he'd achieved surprise against an enemy that assumed American fighters wouldn't use the tactic. Luftwaffe intelligence reports captured later in the war showed German confusion about the August 9th engagement. One report from Jagdgeschwader 52 noted, American twin-engine fighters executed vertical reversals previously considered outside their tactical doctrine. Multiple aircraft performed simultaneous inverted dives. Engagements occurred from unanticipated angles. Standard evasion techniques proved ineffective. The Germans hadn't updated their tactical assessments to account for American pilots willing to break their own doctrine. Within 2 weeks, the 56th Fighter Group was conducting formal split-S training. Senior pilots demonstrated the maneuver. New pilots practiced over water and unpopulated areas. The techniques Johnson had developed through unauthorized experimentation became official squadron doctrine. Technical Order Teo 102 Bravo was revised on September 2nd, 1943. The split-S prohibition was removed. In its place, the split-S maneuver may be employed in combat situations where tactical necessity justifies altitude loss. Minimum safe altitude for maneuver initiation is 8,000 feet above terrain. Maximum entry speed is 420 miles per hour indicated. The revision included Johnson's name in the documentation notes, acknowledging that combat experience had demonstrated capabilities beyond initial engineering assessments. Other P-38 squadrons adopted the tactic rapidly. By October 1943, split-S attacks had become standard doctrine for engaging enemy formations from disadvantageous positions. Pilots who would have disengaged under previous doctrine now had an option for aggressive reversal. German fighter pilots noticed the change. Captured Luftwaffe documents from late 43 showed tactical warnings being distributed. American Lightning pilots now employ vertical reversals. Do not assume they will maintain altitude advantage. Expect attacks from below after apparent disengagement. The psychological impact was significant. German pilots who had relied on the P-38's doctrinal predictability suddenly faced an unpredictable opponent. The tactic didn't just destroy aircraft, it destroyed confidence. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Robert Johnson's August 9th engagement ultimately credited him with 3 confirmed kills and 2 damaged. Crawford received credit for 3 confirmed. The remaining German losses were attributed to other squadron members or listed as probables. But the individual kill count was secondary. Johnson had proven that doctrine, even doctrine based on legitimate safety concerns, could be wrong, or more precisely, could be incomplete. The engineers who prohibited the split-S weren't incompetent. They were cautious. They'd calculated risks based on worst-case scenarios and peacetime safety standards. Combat introduced different calculations. The risk of performing a split-S had to be weighed against the risk of watching bombers die. The risk of overstressing an airframe had to be weighed against the risk of letting enemy fighters escape and regroup. Johnson made those calculations in real time over Ploesti. He decided that 16 B-24 crews mattered more than one technical order. History proved him right. The broader lesson resonated throughout American fighter aviation. Innovation often came from pilots who questioned doctrine, who tested limits, who decided that the manual represented suggestions rather than absolute constraints. The most effective tactics emerged from combat, not from engineering specifications or training manuals. This wasn't recklessness. Johnson hadn't performed the split-S on impulse. He'd studied it, practiced it, understood its margins. When he rolled inverted over Ploesti, he knew what his aircraft could survive. He'd done the homework. He'd accepted the risk. And he'd executed with precision. The distinction mattered. Reckless pilots died. calculated risk-takers won battles. Post-war interviews with Johnson revealed his perspective. The technical order said don't do it, my training said don't do it, every briefing said don't do it. But I'd watched German pilots use the split S to escape a dozen times. I knew the geometry worked. I knew the P-38 could handle it, so when the situation demanded it, I did it. Not because I was brave, because I'd done the math. The math saved 16 bomber crews. That was the only calculation that mattered. By December 1943, split S tactics had spread beyond P-38 units. P-47 Thunderbolt squadrons experimented with the maneuver. P-51 Mustang pilots adopted it. The technique Johnson had pioneered over Ploesti became standard doctrine across American fighter aviation. German responses evolved slowly. By early 1944, Luftwaffe tactical bulletins recommended avoiding engagement with American fighters that possessed altitude advantage, regardless of numerical superiority. The doctrine that had once given German pilots confidence now counseled caution. But caution meant ceding control of airspace. If German fighters avoided engagement whenever American fighters held altitude, they couldn't effectively defend against bombing raids. The tactical dilemma was insoluble. Engage and risk being destroyed by split S attacks. Disengage and watch bombers obliterate strategic targets. American air superiority over Europe in 1944 resulted from multiple factors: numerical superiority, better logistics, more experienced pilots, superior aircraft production. But tactical innovation played a critical role. Pilots like Johnson, who rewrote doctrine in real time, who challenged assumptions, who proved that forbidden wasn't the same as impossible. The August 9th engagement lasted 4 minutes from Johnson's first split S to the German formation's disengagement. 4 minutes where doctrine collapsed and improvisation dominated. 4 minutes that killed at least 6 German pilots and saved dozens of American bomber crewmen. 4 minutes that proved engineering specifications are suggestions. Technical orders are guidelines, and sometimes survival requires breaking the rules designed to keep you safe. Johnson flew 63 combat missions before rotating home in March 1944. He was credited with 8 confirmed kills and 4 damaged. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and a personal commendation from General Jimmy Doolittle. He never spoke extensively about the Ploesti engagement. When asked about performing prohibited maneuvers, his response was consistent. I did what the situation required. The manual said it was dangerous. The situation was dangerous. I picked the option that saved the most lives. August 9th, 1943, 14,000 feet above burning refineries, 20 Bf-109s diving on crippled bombers, 1 P-38 pilot rolling inverted and pulling through a dive the doctrine said would kill him. The dive didn't kill him. It killed the enemy. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a pilot can do is follow orders, and sometimes the forbidden maneuver is the only one that works. Doctrine exists for good reasons. So does disobedience. When American bombers limped north from Ploesti, trailing smoke and losing altitude, they owed their survival to a pilot who decided that technical orders mattered less than the men dying below him. Robert Johnson didn't break doctrine because he was reckless. He broke it because he understood his aircraft better than the people who wrote the rules. The P-38 Lightning could survive the split S. The engineers said it couldn't. The pilots proved otherwise. And in proving it, they rewrote tactical aviation doctrine for the remainder of the war. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.